For more of this kind of content, you can subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment. Kevin Walker wiped the sweat from his brow, his fingers trembling with excitement as he surveyed the colossal structure buried beneath layers of jungle overgrowth. This was the moment he had spent his entire career chasing the discovery of a lost civilization, untouched by time. His team had hesitated to follow him, unnerved by the rumors surrounding this place. Whispers of an ancient deity, chained within the temple's heart, had spread through the nearby villages. The locals called her the Mistress of Desire, a being so powerful that even the gods feared her. Kevin scoffed at the superstition. Torch in hand, he ventured deeper into the temple alone, stepping through a grand archway into a vast underground chamber. The walls pulsed faintly with an unnatural glow, casting eerie shadows that danced across the room. And at the center of it all, bound to a massive obsidian throne, was a woman unlike anything he had ever seen. She was alien, yet breathtakingly beautiful. Her skin was a luminous shade of violet, smooth and flawless. Her black hair cascaded down in thick, intricate braids, framing a face both regal and seductive. Her full lips were slightly parted, her expression unreadable. She was adorned in golden cuffs, each one linked to the throne by chains that pulsed with faint blue energy. But it was her eyes that held him in place, deep, black, endless. They peered into him, peeling back his layers, unraveling his thoughts. He couldn't look away. And then she spoke. "You've come at last." Her voice was a slow caress against his mind, a sultry whisper that made the air around him hum with unseen energy. Kevin swallowed, his instincts warring between caution and fascination. Who are you?" he asked, stepping closer despite himself. The woman smiled, a slow, knowing curve of her lips. "You already know the answer, Kevin Walker." His breath caught in his throat. He hadn't told her his name. Before he could react, she leaned forward, her chains clinking softly. "If you untie me, I will grant your deepest desires in return." Her words slithered through the air like a spell. Kevin's pulse quickened. The air had changed thicker now, charged with something primal. His logical mind screamed for caution, but his body, his soul, they yearned to step closer. His fingers hovered over the first chain, a choice, and once made, there would be no turning back. Kevin's breath was shallow as he stared at the chains. They weren't made of metal, nor any material he recognized. The links pulsed softly, glowing with an eerie blue light, and the moment he reached toward them, the energy within them responded humming, whispering. His fingers tingled as they hovered just inches away. The woman Donna watched him closely. Her black eyes held an intensity that made his stomach twist in ways he didn't fully understand. She wasn't pleading. There was no desperation in her voice. Instead, she commanded his attention, her confidence so absolute that it made his skin burn. "Untie me, Kevin," she said, her voice rolling over his senses like silk. "I have been waiting for you." His logical mind screamed at him. How did she know his name? What force bound her? What happened to those who freed her before? But logic was fading, drowned beneath the weight of her presence. Her scent, intoxicating and otherworldly, filled the air. A mix of something floral yet electric, as though she carried the very scent of temptation itself. Kevin clenched his fists, trying to steady himself. "Who put you here?" he asked, though his voice came out rougher than intended. Donna tilted her head, her lips curling slightly. "Fearful men. Weak men." Her voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. "They chained me because they could not resist me. They feared what they could not control." Her eyes glowed softly. "But you are not like them, are you?" Kevin's heart pounded. He had spent his life chasing the unknown, pushing the limits of discovery, craving the thrill of things forbidden. But this was something else. It wasn't just the mystery of an ancient civilization. It was her. He took a step forward, his resolve unraveling. "What happens if I free you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Donna's lips parted, and he felt her power brush against his skin. "Then I will grant your deepest desires," she purred, "and you will never want for anything again." The air thickened, pressing against him. He felt her presence inside him now, tendrils of unseen energy slithering through his thoughts, teasing his emotions, touching places no one had ever touched before. He should have been afraid. He wasn't. His fingers brushed against the first shackle. A spark of blue light flared, racing up his arm. A surge of raw pleasure, pure, intoxicating, shot through him, nearly bringing him to his knees. Donna's eyes darkened. Her lips parted, as if she had felt it too. Kevin's breath came in short, ragged bursts. The energy crackled around him, and yet he didn't stop. He couldn't. He reached for the next chain, and the next. Each time, the energy pulsed, filling the chamber with a growing charge. As he unclasped the final shackle, the temple shook. A blast of purple light exploded outward, nearly knocking him off his feet. The force sent dust and debris cascading from the ceiling, and the very air vibrated with raw power. Donna gasped a sound unlike anything he had heard before. The shackles shattered, the last remnants of their energy flickering before vanishing completely. Then, she stood. Kevin's throat went dry. The power that radiated from her was unreal. She stretched, rolling her shoulders, her body glowing with a deep, otherworldly energy. Her every movement was fluid, deliberate, predatory. And then, she looked at him, and smiled. The kind of smile that sent shivers down his spine. The kind of smile that promised he had just changed his fate forever. The air crackled with a heat Kevin had never felt before. The temple trembled as if awakening after centuries of slumber, and the moment Donna took her first step forward, everything changed. She moved like liquid fire, graceful, powerful, undeniable. Her violet skin shimmered under the dim light of the chamber, and the energy pulsing from her body rolled over him like an invisible storm, pressing against his very soul. Kevin's instinct screamed at him to move to run. He didn't. He couldn't. His breath came in sharp, uneven gasps as Donna approached, the weight of her gaze pinning him in place. He had spent his life uncovering lost secrets, unraveling the mysteries of ancient worlds, but nothing in his years of study had prepared him for her. Donna stopped just inches from him, tilting her head slightly, as she observed him with a mixture of amusement and something deeper, something hungry. Her fingers lifted elegant, sharp, and without even touching him, he felt a pull at his core. It was as if unseen hands were gripping his very essence, tugging, claiming. His body burned. His mind reeled. And yet, even as he tried to resist, he knew it was useless. You feel it, don't you? Donna's voice was smooth as silk, teasing, knowing. Kevin swallowed hard. He did. Whatever she had done to him when he released her, it had changed something fundamental inside of him. The pulse of her energy was inside him now, winding through his veins, filling his lungs, taking hold. Donna's smile widened. You were brave to free me, Kevin. She stepped closer, her body mere inches from his own. Or perhaps reckless. Her fingers finally touched his chest. It was the lightest of brushes, and yet a shockwave of pure sensation ripped through him. Kevin staggered back, breathless, every nerve in his body alive with raw electricity. Donna exhaled a pleased sigh. Yes, I can feel it already. You are strong, but you are mine now. Her fingers traced the air between them, and his knees nearly buckled at the invisible force that coiled around his body like a serpent. His jaw clenched. I don't belong to anyone, he growled, fighting against the hold she had on him. Donna's laughter was pure temptation, rich and full of dark amusement. Oh, Kevin, how adorable. She leaned in, her lips just barely brushing against his ear. But you do. You just don't know it yet. The temple trembled again, the walls pulsing with Donna's newfound freedom. Ancient glyphs glowed brighter, casting eerie shadows, and the ground beneath them seemed to breathe. The energy in the chamber was shifting, evolving. Kevin's muscles tensed. He had to get his bearings, had to resist. But then Donna's fingers curled under his chin, lifting his face to meet her gaze once more. And in that instant, he realized this was no longer a battle of strength. It was a battle of will, and Donna was winning. Kevin's breath was ragged as Donna's fingers tilted his chin up, forcing him to meet her gaze. Those endless black eyes swallowed him whole, a depth of power so vast it made his stomach tighten with something he couldn't name, something between fear and desire. The temple continued to shake, as though the very walls were reacting to her freedom, to the raw energy that pulsed from her like a living force. The air was thick, humming with unseen power, pressing against his skin, making it tingle. Donna smiled, slow and knowing, as if she could feel the war raging inside him. You freed me, Kevin. And now, her voice was a whisper against his lips. You are mine. His pulse thundered in his ears. A fierce instinct, a primal urge, commanded him to resist, to fight. But another part of him, a darker, more reckless part, wanted to see just how far this would go. Kevin clenched his fists, grounding himself. I don't belong to you. His voice was strong, But even as he spoke, the chains of her presence wrapped tighter around him, invisible, but unbreakable. Donna let out a soft hum, running her fingers along his jawline. "Oh, but you do. You just don't understand it yet." Then, with a flick of her wrist, an unseen force slammed into him. His knees buckled. He crashed down onto the cold stone floor, his body refusing to move, pinned beneath the sheer weight of her energy. A sharp exhale left his lips, but he refused to break. Refused. Donna watched him with something dangerously close to amusement. Still defiant, she stepped closer, her bare feet silent against the temple floor. Good. I like that. The weight against him shifted, changing, twisting. It wasn't just raw force, it was something else. It seeped into his skin, curling around his limbs like a lover's touch. It tasted his resistance, tugged at his strength, not breaking him, tempting him. Kevin gritted his teeth. He had never encountered anything like this. Not in all his years of uncovering lost civilizations, not in any of the near-death experiences that had shaped him. Donna knelt in front of him, her presence overwhelming, her scent filling his lungs with something that made his body hum with forbidden heat. "Tell me, Kevin." Her fingers trailed down his chest, tracing the lines of his shirt. "What is it you truly desire?" His breath hitched, because the worst part, the part he didn't want to admit, somewhere, deep in his core, he already knew. Kevin's breathing was uneven, his body betraying him in ways he couldn't control. Every inch of him burned, not from fear, not from pain, but from her. Donna's presence wrapped around him like a storm, suffocating yet intoxicating, overwhelming yet irresistible. Her fingers dragged over his chest, her touch feather-light, yet the sensation rippled through his skin like fire. The weight of her power kept him on his knees, locked in place, forced to look up at her. Donna watched him with hungry amusement, her violet lips curving into something dangerous. "You feel it, don't you?" Kevin clenched his jaw. He refused to answer. She leaned in, her breath a ghost against his ear. "You can fight it, but I can feel you, Kevin. I can feel the way your body reacts. I can taste the war inside you." Her words coiled around his thoughts, pulling at him, teasing at something buried deep in his core. He sucked in a sharp breath. "You think you can break me?" Donna chuckled, the sound low, sultry, knowing. "Break you?" Her fingers slid up, tilting his chin again, forcing him to hold her gaze. "No, Kevin, I don't want to break you." She leaned closer, her lips a breath away from his own. "I want you to break yourself for me." A shudder ran through him, not from fear, not from weakness, from want. He had to resist, had to fight this. Kevin inhaled sharply, forcing steel into his voice. "I've never belonged to anyone," Donna smiled. "That's what makes this fun." Without warning, the energy inside him shifted. A raw, pulsing force spread through his limbs, stroking every nerve, teasing every inch of him, pushing him to the edge of something indescribable. And then, just when he felt himself slipping, she pulled away. Kevin's head snapped up, his body screaming for something it had never known before. Donna's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Did you feel that?" His hands curled into fists. Damn her. She was playing with him, using her power, using his own body against him, tempting him, forcing him to feel how easily he could fall. He let out a slow, shaky breath. "You're enjoying this." Donna's lips curled. "Oh, immensely." Kevin exhaled through his nose. His body still ached from the lingering touch of her power, the pleasure she had dangled in front of him only to take it away. He hated that he wanted more, and Donna knew it. She stood, towering over him, radiating victory. "You freed me, Kevin. That means I get to keep you." A dangerous smirk flickered across her lips. "And I have no intention of letting you go." The weight of those words settled over him like a chain, invisible yet unshakable. And for the first time, Kevin wasn't sure if he wanted to escape at all. The temple walls still pulsed with residual energy, the very air thick with power. Donna stood before Kevin, her violet skin glowing under the dim light, her dark eyes filled with triumph. He was still on his knees, not by choice, her invisible force still pressed against him, keeping him exactly where she wanted him, below her, under her control. And yet, something inside him resisted. He wasn't broken. Not yet. Donna studied him, her head tilting slightly. "You're fighting it." Kevin exhaled sharply. "Of course I am." Her lips curved, slow and predatory. "Good." A flick of her wrist, and the force lifted him, not to his feet, but into the air. Weightless, suspended, helpless. Kevin's breath caught as unseen restraints bound him, wrapping around his wrists, his legs, keeping him open before her. He thrashed against the hold, but the more he fought, the tighter it became. Donna walked around him in slow, deliberate steps, her presence brushing against his skin like a whisper. "You are strong, Kevin." Her fingers ghosted over his chest, tracing the lines of his body. But even the strongest have limits. His jaw tightened. "And you think you can find mine?" Donna's laughter was low, rich, knowing. "Oh, I don't think." A pulse of raw energy coiled around him, slipping into his muscles, teasing, stroking, exploring every inch of him. Kevin let out a strangled breath, his body betraying him. Donna felt it. She leaned in, lips grazing the edge of his jaw. "Do you know what the most exquisite form of surrender is?" Her fingers pressed against his chest, sending another pulse of energy through him. "Not the kind that is taken." Her nails dragged lightly over his skin. "The kind that is given." Kevin clenched his teeth. She was toying with him, testing him, pushing him, and it was working. The energy wrapped around him like an invisible embrace, a constant touch he couldn't escape. It was relentless, pushing him to the edge, and yet never letting him fall. Kevin exhaled sharply, his control fraying. "You're playing a dangerous game." Donna's smile widened. "I always win." The power inside him twisted, shifting from torment to pleasure, a cycle that left him on the verge of breaking, but never quite letting him. Hours passed, maybe minutes, maybe days. Time no longer existed. All that existed was her. The way she pushed him, the way she denied him, the way she refused to let him have the very thing his body had begun to crave. Kevin's muscles tensed, his breath uneven. He couldn't take much more of this. Donna knew it. She stepped closer, her lips brushing against his ear. "You will surrender, Kevin." A final pulse of energy ripped through him, leaving him gasping, shaking, aching for something he refused to name. Then, just as suddenly, she was gone. The invisible restraints vanished, and he collapsed to the floor, his body trembling from the aftermath of her power. Donna stood over him, arms crossed, her expression one of pure amusement. "Tomorrow, we continue." Kevin let out a slow breath, his body still humming from her torment, from her control, and for the first time, a realization sank into his bones. He wasn't sure how much longer he could resist her. Kevin lay on the cold stone floor, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. His muscles were taut, every inch of him still thrumming with the aftershocks of Donna's relentless torment. She hadn't even touched him, not in the way a human would, but her power, her presence. She had wrapped it around him like a web, keeping him trapped, teasing him, pushing him to the brink, but never letting him fall. It had been torture, and the worst part, he had wanted it. Kevin clenched his fists, forcing himself to focus. He had spent his life in control, commanding, leading, conquering. Never had he been the one on his knees. Never had he been at someone else's mercy. Yet here he was, and Donna was loving it. She stood above him, her violet skin glowing in the dim temple light, her eyes dark with amusement. "You're still resisting," she mused, tilting her head as if he were some fascinating puzzle to be solved. Kevin exhaled sharply, forcing himself to meet her gaze. "Damn right I am." Donna smiled slow, indulgent. "Good. I enjoy watching you fight." She crouched beside him, trailing her fingers over the stone just inches from his face. "But we both know how this ends." Kevin's jaw tightened. "You think you can break me?" Her laughter was a low, sultry purr. "Oh, Kevin." She leaned in, her breath teasing his lips. "I don't have to break you. You'll shatter all on your own." And then she touched him, not with her hands, with her power. It slithered over him, sinking beneath his skin, wrapping around his very soul. It was everywhere, stroking, teasing, unraveling him piece by piece. Kevin's body arched involuntarily, a shockwave of sensation ripping through him. Donna's smile widened. "See? Even now you're coming apart for me." His breath hitched. He wanted to fight it, had to, but she was inside him now. Not just his body, his mind. She was peeling him open, exposing everything, his thoughts, his desires, his weaknesses, and she was using them against him. Kevin's fingers dug into the stone beneath him, his muscles trembling. "You like control." His voice was rough but steady. "But you won't have mine." Donna's expression flickered just for a second. Then she laughed, low and rich. "Oh, Kevin." A fresh pulse of power surged through him, pressing against every vulnerable part of him, making him gasp before he could stop himself. Donna leaned in, her lips grazing his ear. You already belong to me. Kevin's breath came faster. The worst part was, she was right, he could feel it. His body was betraying him. His mind was starting to falter. He was still fighting, still resisting. But how much longer could he last? Donna pulled away, satisfaction gleaming in her gaze. You're close, she murmured. So very close. Then she stepped back. The sudden loss of her power was a shock to his system, leaving him raw, aching, desperate for something he refused to name. Kevin let out a shaky breath. Donna smirked. You'll beg for it soon enough. And with that, she vanished into the shadows, leaving him on the cold temple floor alone, shaken, and knowing that this battle, he was losing. Kevin sat in the dim temple chamber, his back against the cold stone, his body still humming from the lingering phantom touch of Donna's power. He inhaled sharply, trying to steady himself, trying to push away the unsettling realization that had begun to creep into his mind. He was changing. Not in the way a prisoner breaks beneath the weight of chains. No, this was something different, more dangerous. He was beginning to want it. The air shifted. A slow pulse of energy, familiar, intoxicating, crawled over his skin, announcing her return before he even saw her. Kevin lifted his head as Donna emerged from the shadows, her every movement exuding command, confidence, certainty. She knew. She knew what was happening to him, and she was enjoying every second of it. You're still fighting. Her voice was soft, almost teasing. She took slow, deliberate steps toward him, her violet skin glowing under the flickering torchlight. I can feel it, Kevin. His throat was dry. She came to a stop before him, tilting her head. Tell me, do you even know what you're resisting anymore? Kevin clenched his jaw. You, Donna smirked. Are you sure? A flick of her wrist, and suddenly the invisible force returned. It wasn't just pressure. It was her, coiling around him like an unseen predator, stroking over his skin, pushing into his mind, claiming space that had never belonged to anyone before. His muscles tensed. His breath shuddered, every part of him going rigid as the energy wrapped around his throat, his wrists, his very soul. Donna crouched before him, her black eyes holding his own, drinking in the way his body reacted, the way his control fractured. She smiled. You're craving it now, aren't you? Kevin's fingers twitched, his heart hammering against his ribs. She leaned in, her lips barely brushing against his jaw. I don't have to force you, Kevin. Her breath was a whisper of heat against his skin. You will surrender on your own. His hands curled into fists. I won't. Donna exhaled a soft laugh. You already are. And then she pushed deeper, not just into his body, into his very core. Kevin gasped, his vision going white hot as she invaded every part of him, her power teasing, stroking, unraveling him. She was inside him now, inside his mind, inside his desires, inside his soul. His resistance was crumbling piece by piece, breaking apart under her relentless, merciless touch. And worst of all, he wasn't sure if he wanted to stop it. Donna's lips curved in victory. You're close. She leaned in, her lips just barely brushing against his ear. Say it, Kevin. The words pressed into him, coiling like a serpent around his lungs. His breath shallow, his body taut, trembling on the precipice of something irreversible. Donna's power pulsed again, one final stroke, one last test. Kevin's head fell back against the stone. His lips parted, and then he whispered it. Yours. A sharp exhale left Donna's lips. The temple shook. The energy exploded around them, sealing the moment, solidifying what had just happened, what had just shifted between them. Kevin had surrendered. And Donna? She had won. The air in the temple crackled with energy, thick with the aftermath of something irreversible. Kevin's whisper still lingered in the space between them. A confession. A breaking point one Donna had waited for. Yours. The word had sealed him to her. He was hers now. Donna exhaled, her body humming with satisfaction, her black eyes gleaming with something dark and victorious. She had broken him not with chains, not with force, but with the one thing that no warrior, no conqueror, no man could ever fight: desire. She traced a single finger down his chest, her touch sending ripples of energy through his skin. You gave in so beautifully, Kevin. Kevin swallowed, his breathing still uneven, his muscles taut from the lingering echoes of her power. His body still trembled, but not from fear, from something else, something more dangerous. Donna smirked, enjoying his reaction, watching him with an air of amusement. Tell me, how does it feel to belong to a goddess? Kevin lifted his head, his dark eyes locking onto hers. There was still fire in them, still the ember of resistance, but different now. His lips curled into a slow, knowing smirk. "Why don't you tell me?" Donna blinked. Then something shifted. The energy between them, once so entirely under her control, shuddered, flipped. Kevin inhaled deeply, and for the first time since he had entered this temple, he felt it, her weakness. It wasn't fear, it wasn't vulnerability, but she wasn't untouchable. His lips parted as he understood. Donna had been in control for so long, had commanded submission, had demanded surrender, but she had never, not once, felt someone push back. Kevin's smirk deepened. "You act like you're the only one who can play this game, Donna." A flicker of something flashed in her gaze. Kevin moved fast, faster than she expected. His hands shot out, grasping her wrists, and he pulled her down. Not with brute force, not with physical power, but with something stronger, the bond between them. Donna gasped, her body collapsing into his, her chest pressing against his as her balance faltered. For the first time, she wasn't in control. The temple shook again, but this time, it wasn't because of her. It was because of him. Kevin's smirk widened. "You should have known, Donna." His voice was smooth, rich with amusement. "You weren't the only one setting a trap." Donna's eyes narrowed, her breathing heavier than before. She tried to move, to summon her power, but it didn't come as easily now. Kevin had turned the tide. He hadn't just surrendered. He had adapted. He had learned how to touch her power, how to feed from it, how to twist it against her. Donna let out a slow, measured breath. Then she smiled. A real smile. "Well, well." Her voice was a sultry whisper. "Perhaps you were worth freeing after all." Kevin's grip on her tightened. "And perhaps you were worth surrendering to." A beat of silence. Then the war truly began. Not a war of chains, not a war of dominance, a war of equals. And neither of them had any intention of losing. The temple walls pulsed, resonating with the power shift between them. Energy crackled in the air, wild, untamed, uncontrollable. The invisible chains that had once bound Kevin to Donna's will had shattered, not because she had let him go, but because he had found his way inside them. Kevin held Donna close, his grip firm yet teasing, his dark eyes locked onto hers with undeniable intensity. She was strong, but so was he. Donna's breath was uneven, her body reacting to something new, something she had never encountered before. No one had ever turned the game against her. No one had ever met her power and matched it. Until now. Kevin's smirk deepened. "You feel it, don't you?" Donna let out a slow exhale, her black eyes narrowing, but her amusement remained. "You're playing with fire, human." Kevin tilted his head, his fingers tracing over the air between them, feeling the raw energy that still pulsed in the space where their power clashed. "Maybe." He let his grip on her loosen slightly, just enough to let her think she was free, only for her to realize she wasn't. Donna's lips parted, her pupils dilating. Kevin wasn't holding her physically. He was holding her with her own power. Impossible. Kevin chuckled, the sound deep, satisfied. "Nothing is impossible. You taught me that." Donna's expression flickered between frustration and intrigue. "You think you've won?" Kevin leaned in slightly, his breath ghosting over her lips. "I think we both have." For a moment, neither of them moved. The temple around them seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting, watching as two forces that were never meant to meet collided. Then Donna's smirk returned, her violet skin shimmering under the temple's dim glow. "Very well, Kevin." Her fingers slid along his arm, the touch both powerful and teasing. "Let's see just how much of my power you can handle." Another pulse of energy surged between them, but this time, Kevin didn't flinch. He caught it, absorbed it, and for the first time, Donna gasped. Kevin grinned. "I can handle more than you think." The goddess's amusement didn't fade, but there was something new in her gaze now. Something deeper, something neither of them had expected. Curiosity. Donna had ruled over men, over kings, over civilizations that had long turned to dust beneath her feet. But never had she encountered one who refused to be ruled, one who stood against her and did not crumble. She had taken many before him, but Kevin was the first to take her, and suddenly, she wondered, had she finally met her match? The air between them was no longer just a battle of dominance. It was something more, something undeniable, something dangerous, something inevitable. Kevin lifted a single brow, his smirk never fading. "So, tell me, Donna." His voice was lower now, teasing, challenging. "What happens when the goddess and her prisoner become equals?" Donna's pulse thrummed. She didn't know, and for the first time in millennia, she wanted to find out. Donna's dark eyes flickered, her breath steady but measured. The weight of Kevin's words hung between them, charged with something far more potent than power or dominance curiosity. She had lived for millennia, bending men to her will, owning them in body, mind, and soul. She had seen civilizations rise and fall beneath her feet, had shattered the wills of kings, conquerors, and warriors alike. But Kevin had turned the game against her, and now he stood before her, his smirk edged with something dangerous, something she had never faced before: equality. Donna stepped back, slowly, deliberately, studying him like one might an unknown weapon. "You are different," Kevin chuckled. "I get that a lot." Her gaze narrowed, but there was no anger, no frustration, only the glimmer of something she had never felt before: intrigue. She had expected him to fall, expected him to break beneath the weight of her power, to worship her like all the others before him. Instead, he had adapted. He had learned her power, turned it against her, matched her. Kevin took a step closer, his presence just as commanding as hers now. "What happens now, Donna?" His voice was low, teasing, but there was something else beneath it: genuine curiosity. For the first time, she didn't know the answer. The temple walls pulsed with an ancient rhythm, as if responding to their energy, their battle, their connection. Donna inhaled slowly. This had never happened before. Never had a man resisted her for this long. Never had someone stood against her and survived. Never had she felt the pull of something unknown. And in that moment, a realization struck her. She had been afraid, not of him, not of losing, but of what it meant if she didn't win. For the first time, she wasn't in control of the outcome. Kevin saw it, felt it. His smirk widened. "You don't know, do you?" Donna lifted her chin, her pride still unshaken. "I always know." Kevin took another step forward, invading her space, just as she had invaded his before. "Then tell me." He leaned in, his lips barely brushing against hers, teasing, challenging. "Why are you hesitating?" Her breath hitched. Hesitating? She never hesitated. She was the one who dictated how things unfolded. She was the one who set the rules. She was the one who commanded surrender. And yet, here she was standing still. Kevin wasn't on his knees anymore. He was standing beside her. Donna's fingers twitched. She could push him back. She could end this right now, could reclaim her dominance, could force him down again. And yet, she didn't. Instead, her lips parted. "Because you are not like the others." Kevin exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. He had known this for a while, but hearing her say it, it changed everything. The temple walls shook, the ancient magic within it reacting to something neither of them could explain. Something was shifting, not just between them, within them. And for the first time, Donna, the immortal goddess, who had never known fear, never known weakness, never known surrender, wondered if she had finally met the one man who could truly bring her to her knees. The temple trembled. The very air around them hummed, vibrating with the raw energy of something ancient, something powerful, something inevitable. Donna stood before Kevin, her violet skin illuminated by the glowing glyphs that lined the walls. Her black eyes, always so unreadable, so in control, now held something foreign. Uncertainty. Kevin saw it, felt it. For the first time, she was afraid, not of him, not of losing, but of what she had found, of what he had become to her. Kevin exhaled slowly. "It's over, Donna." His voice was steady, calm. "We both know it." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't move, didn't lash out, didn't summon her power to force him to his knees again, because she knew he wasn't hers to break anymore. Kevin stepped forward, closing the space between them. He reached out, cupping her face with surprising gentleness. "I don't belong to you." Donna's lips parted, a sharp inhale leaving her throat. Then he tilted her chin up, forcing her to look at him. "And you don't belong to me." Her breath hitched. Kevin's thumb traced her cheek, his touch warm, real. "We are something else entirely." Silence. The temple walls pulsed, reacting to their shifting energies, the magic in the air turning from a chaotic storm into something balanced, something complete. Donna's eyes softened, just slightly. Then she did something she had never done before. She stepped back, not in retreat, not in defeat, but in acceptance. Her gaze never left his as she exhaled slowly. "No one has ever resisted me, Kevin." His lips twitched into a smirk. "I noticed." A pause. Then Donna smiled, a real smile, not teasing, not amused, something else, something human. Kevin reached for her hand. "No more chains, Donna." She hesitated, just for a second. Then she took it, The temple erupted with light, the walls glowing brighter than ever before, the energy shifting from something ancient and locked away to something alive. The last of the invisible chains that had bound Donna for millennia shattered not because Kevin had freed her, but because she had freed herself. Donna let out a slow breath, her fingers tightening around his. "You broke my chains, human." She stepped closer, her body against his, her lips just inches away. "Now you will be mine. Forever." Kevin smirked. "Only if you're mine too." Donna's gaze darkened, her power coiling around him, not to restrain, not to control, but to bind, to claim. The temple shook one final time, and then it fell silent. Somewhere, far beyond the jungle, the world would wonder what had happened to Kevin Walker, the archaeologist who had disappeared into the ruins. But the truth? He hadn't been lost. He had been found. And somewhere, deep within the cosmos, a goddess and her human consort reigned together, bound by something far greater than power. Something far more dangerous. Love. The end.